China is on everybody's mind these days, especially when it comes to tools, because let's face it, most of the tools that you own were probably manufactured in China. And I've heard lots of opinions from a lot of people about Chinese tools, Chinese manufacturing, tariffs. But over the years, I've learned that if I want to know more about what's going on, I have to go right to the source. So that's what I did. A few weeks ago, I hopped aboard a gigantic 2-story jumbo jet. I put up my feet and I napped most of the way through the 30-hour trip from Michigan to Los Angeles to Korea and finally to the ancient Chinese capital city of Nanjing to see for myself what was going on and what the future holds for people like you and me who buy woodworking and DIY tools. By the way, getting into China as an American in this day and age is not like just popping over the border to Canada or even going to the UK. I had to go through a detailed and rather expensive business visa application process, and they required that I be officially invited by a company inside China before I could get a visa. Well, fortunately, I have a relationship with Harvey Industries, which make many of the tools that I've had in my shop for several years now. So they arranged my visit, they took care of me while I was there, and they gave me up close and personal access not only to modern Chinese culture, but insight into how at least one Chinese company is working to change the outdated idea that high-end tools can't be made in the Far East. What I saw was nothing like what I expected. I know that I only experienced one small piece of what is a much bigger and vastly more complex story, but I came away with an entirely different perspective from what I had been hearing on the news or on the internet. Let me just say that what's really happening in China right now is going to change everything for the rest of us in the very near future. I noticed it on my very first day there. As I left the airport, my driver pointed to one building after another that makes most of the tools we're familiar with in America and Europe. It seemed like everything was made right there in Nanjing, and China's full of other manufacturing cities just like it. Imagine Detroit, but 10 times the size, and there are countless other Chinese Detroits. The roads were packed with a huge variety of cars, literally hundreds of Chinese brands that I had never seen before. And many of them looked kind of nice. Green license plates identified about a third of them as hybrids or full electric, far more than I'm used to seeing in the US. The city itself is modern and clean despite being hundreds of years old. And while I have no doubt they have their share of crime and poverty, everywhere I went was peaceful. Remember, this is a mega city, larger than New York, but the overall vibe was completely different. It felt more relaxed. Families were out together for strolls, taking pictures of flowers and of each other. I could talk all day about the food because I sampled plenty of it. Some was a little different for me, especially the presentation. They definitely loved their duck in Nanjing, but it looked like it had just been ritually executed. They've also embraced American fast food culture. There's several of the big names available. Kentucky Fried Chicken seems especially popular. But I wasn't there for the food. I was there for the tools, and that meant a visit to Harvey headquarters, home of high-end woodworking machinery. They make many products, but their flagships are their table saws, their band saws, and their unique dust collectors. I have several of these in my shop back here in Michigan, but I was excited to spend some time talking about ideas for improvements and to get a little inside information about new technology they have in development. Stuff that unfortunately they swore me to secrecy about, but which will completely change how you use your tools. That is not an exaggeration. They're doing things with common woodworking machines that have never been done before. That's all I can say right now. The Nanjing factory is one of 2 that Harvey owns. It's mostly used for assembly, which explains how they're able to keep it so immaculately clean and well organized. They happened to be working on dust collectors when I was there, but I also saw some table saw trunnions and other parts. The factory is also where they assemble Bridge City Tools, which is another high-end brand that Harvey owns. The Bridge City tool story is a very interesting one. It started back in Portland, Oregon by John Economaki, and then he passed it on to his good friend Jack Liu, who owns Harvey. John handpicked Jack specifically because they had the same vision, but that's a subject for another video. I couldn't get over how neat and clean everything was. From what I've always heard about China, I expected to see very different working conditions. And I'm sure there are busier times when they have larger orders to process and more workers on the floor. But I was able to interact with many of them, and I'm convinced that this was a fairly typical day in this factory. They also do product development here, including testing and some quality control. Harvey doesn't operate foundries and mills. They contract all that out to a vast supply chain of hundreds of independent businesses. Since I wasn't able to visit any Chinese steel mills, I can't compare the working conditions there to what they may be elsewhere. I can only speak to the conditions at Harvey, and it's clear that their workers are well paid and cared for. The Nanjing factory isn't the only one Harvey owns. They also have a factory in Yangzhou, a smaller city of just 4.5 million people. China has about 150 cities with populations in excess of 1 million people. Compare that to just 36 in all of Europe combined. There are 19 Chinese megacities with over 10 million people in each. In the US, there are 0. Keep this in mind because I'll tell you what that means for our tools in the future. Yangzhou is where Harvey assembles their larger machines, such as their bandsaws and their table saws and their lathes. Interestingly, you have probably owned or used a Harvey machine at some point without even knowing it. Many of the major brands, the ones that have been household names in the US for decades, particularly in woodworking and metalworking, were actually made by Harvey for many years. But these companies were constantly pushing down the standards to make machines cheaper and cheaper. I'm not going to call out any of those brands here, but the corners they were cutting became ridiculous. And so Jack said, enough. Harvey began putting the focus back on quality and innovation with their own line of premium machinery a few years before the pandemic. And that's when I was first introduced to Harvey, after a chance meeting at an Atlanta restaurant with Mark Strawler, who is a legend in the industry from his days with Craftsman and Delta, back when those brands were the standard for quality. Well, Mark told me that if I wanted that kind of quality in this day and age, I needed to check out Harvey. And so I did. That led me to an old Woodworkers Journal article from 2017 about a guy named Jack Liu who was working to change the way the West thinks about Chinese tools. I was fascinated by that article. I'll link to it below if you want to read it. Ultimately, it led me to China all these years later, and everything I saw just reinforced what the article said. I expected to see the quality because I've been using these machines for several years now. What I didn't expect, what really shocked me, was the glimpse of the future this trip afforded me. Take the factories, for example. Sure, they make a lot of machines here, but I also saw a lot of unused space. They have the capacity for much, much more, and that's true of China as a whole. They may appear to make pretty much everything already, but we haven't seen anything yet. Their capacity for more manufacturing is tremendous. As I spoke to the workers at Harvey, I also noticed their work ethic. They are absolutely dedicated to their jobs. Their work is tied to who they are. And that is deeply ingrained in Chinese culture as a whole in a way that is almost completely foreign to many Westerners nowadays. As I saw some of the things that Harvey was developing, features and new technology that will change how our machines work, another stereotype was shattered. The Chinese aren't just co-opting Western technology. China is capable of doing amazing things when it comes to developing new tech and unique products on their own. Finally, as I spent time with the workers, I saw the quality of life that the modern Chinese population have lately become accustomed to. And so I started to put all the pieces together in my mind. China is the United States around 1950. Back then, our grandparents' generation lived in a world with a tremendous post-war manufacturing capacity that was just waiting to be fully tapped. That generation had a work ethic that few still embrace today. They were also on the cusp of a new age of innovation and technology, and they were beginning to leave behind the frugality of the Great Depression and eager to embrace a higher standard of living. All that led to an economic explosion back then that led to amazing things here in the US over the last 3/4 of a century. That's where China is now. The Chinese people are a frugal culture. They've had to be. But that's changing with the new generations. As more and more start demanding a more Western way of life, becoming large-scale consumers of their own products, there will be no stopping their economy because they have the capacity, they have the work ethic, and they have the ability to innovate. So what will this mean for Western tool manufacturing? Competition on a level we haven't even begun to imagine. The days of thinking all Chinese tools are junk are gone. Some of the best tools are now made in China, and a savvy woodworker or DIYer recognizes that those old stereotypes are just that, old and outdated. The world is changing.
关注我，看尽国外热门视频。